everyone, Ramey here, and today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the Apple Watch and whether it's worth buying or not. For those that know me know that I have all kinds of technology. I'm a professor of instructional technology. I just love it. So for me, it's totally worth it. But when I'm asked by someone off the street if it's worth it, I don't always have the same answer. So I'm going to kind of talk through some of those points that I would tell someone if they're considering this device. So, the first thing, before you go on and spend your $400 or $500 on this new device, which by the way is updated every single year, a new version comes out. So by the time you buy it, they're usually on the next version. But is it worth it? Is it worth it for you to get one of these? Is it cool? What are the advantages and disadvantages? So the first thing I want to tell you about the Apple Watch is that it is connected to an iPhone. So if you don't have an iPhone, you can't use the Apple Watch. You have to be an iPhone user. So that's like the first thing I ask someone, because if you're using Android or something else, maybe you're not even a smartphone user, you're using like one of the pay by month phones, you can't have the Apple Watch. You have to have an iPhone. So that's the first thing I usually tell people. Then they ask, do you like getting the notifications and what does it do? And so the point of the Apple Watch is it's very similar to having your phone on your wrist. What that means is when I get a text message, it shows up on my wrist. When someone calls, it shows up on my wrist, and I can even talk to someone via my wrist, which is really cool. And obviously, you know what it does? It tells the time. Surprisingly, it does tell the time. But there are other cool little tricks and things that it does that people may not realize that are kind of outside of the scope of that. But first of all, is it cool, just getting a text message on your wrist? Do you need to have that? No, you don't need it. It's not something you need. But you know what? When I'm in a meeting or I'm teaching a class and I get a message, I don't want to always be pulling my phone out. I can really quickly look at my wrist just like I'm looking at my watch. So in that regard, it's really nice getting text messages. When I'm at the gym or doing something, I can kind of see my wrist without having to pull my phone out. So in that regard, it's very nice. Also, I have little kids, so having a baby and being able to hold them, and I can quickly see my wrist if someone calls or messages me to see if it's important without having to lose a hand and check the phone to see what it is. So in that regard, it is really nice and a cool advantage feature. But do you need it? Absolutely. You don't need to take calls from your wrist. You don't need to get text messages from your wrist. It is a luxury. It's something that's nice to have. But there are some reasons I do think that other people would consider, besides just getting texts and stuff from your wrist, that I think something like this device is very worthwhile. So let me talk about a few of those. So first of all, I'm going to talk about some examples and some situations where I found it very useful. So other things the watch does in general, it's got the weather. It can tell you it has all these little apps that can do different things, just like your phone. So if you have your phone with you all the time, do you really need the watch? No, you don't need it. But here's some of the things that it does do that really kind of makes it different from a phone and some of the reasons I like people to have it. So the first one is the ability to take calls. So like when I'm walking around my house, I don't have my phone on me, but I do have my watch on me. So if someone calls, I see that someone calling and I can actually answer it right from my watch or go run to my phone. I do like that, especially like if I'm outside with the kids. I don't have my watch on me all the time or my phone on me all the time. So I'm able to just get those calls or see if it's an emergency and see if it's important. So I really like that. Now, you can purchase the ability to have LTE, which is phone service on the watch. That means for most people, when you get the watch, it connects to your phone, but they have to be close to one another, like in the same house. But if you purchase the extra service, you can actually use this 10 miles away from my phone and still take and receive phone calls. Why is that worthwhile? So I think that's reason number one why someone may want to have the Apple Watch and think it's a necessity. So I think for most people, I don't think they are going to need that, but there are some times when it's really cool. For example, I was surfing 2 or 3 years ago and I got injured in the water. I had a cut on my hand, actually. I had to get stitches, be rushed to the hospital and get stitches. It was really bad, but I wasn't able to make a phone call. Had I had my watch on me in that emergency situation, because I can't bring my cell phone in the water, I would have been able to make an emergency phone call. So the fact that this is an emergency device in places where you don't normally carry a phone is great. So think about that. I'm surfing a place I cannot have a phone. I have a way to make an emergency phone call. So if you're in situations like that, if you think about your life and your lifestyle and what you do, and you think, wow, I am in some situations similar to that where that could be very useful. Another situation is we were at Disney last summer and we were at the water park, and I didn't want to carry my phone through the water park, but I had to take one of the kids and my wife had to take the other kids because they're different. Our kids are, they're different ages. They each wanted to do different kinds of rides. So in order for us to communicate, I had to carry my phone through the water park, like wrapped in this like plastic thing. It was kind of a pain. But the watch allowed me to be able to just put it in my locker while my wife had to carry her phone. I was able to actually just use my watch and text and keep in contact with her without having to have anything on me, so I could swim. Now, we're big swimmers in my family. We have a pool and everything. So being able to do that, swim, and still get my messages is important. Now, if it's not important for you to actually get messages, then that wouldn't apply to you. But I do think it's something to consider. I think that's one of the big reasons to get an Apple Watch is you want to be able to make phone calls from your wrist. If that's not important for you, you may not want to get it. So let's talk about another of the reasons that I think are very important about getting a smartwatch in general, but the Apple Watch. And that is the ability to track your heart rate. So what it does is it takes your pulse. So continuously takes your pulse. Why is that important? I'm a big believer that it's important for every human to know their pulse rate, especially older Americans. And younger Americans, it's not as important unless you're one of the people that have a problem with it. Because you know what? There are times when young Americans have disease and they don't realize it, and their heart rate is a huge signal of that disease. And a watch like this can help determine that. In fact, it has countless of times. If you start looking online, you'll see people who it discovered they had something because they noticed their heart rate was off, or they were having a heart attack, or, in AFib or something like that. So for older Americans 50 and above, I think every person should have something that, since the technology is so cheap and available, every person should have something that measures their heart rate on them to be able to help their health. Now, I'm not saying you have to wear it all the time, but you should know, like, this is what my resting heart rate is. This is what my average heart rate is. And if you see something funky or off, you're able to get help. So a device like this can literally save your life, and it has. And I'm not just saying that to convince people to buy it. I don't get anything from Apple if you buy the watch, so I don't really care if you get it or not. But I'm just saying it really can help save someone's life. And I think that's a really useful feature worth considering. It does have, the American version does have an AFib tester on it, but really just having your pulse rate is all you need. And I think it's a really, really great feature to be able to track your heart health through a watch. Because it does measure it. And then on to that, there are the normal features of the watch. Like if someone's big into working out, it's great to be able to track all your bike and runs and swims and lifting and all those workouts on a watch and have storage of it. But someone like my dad, he works out all the time, but he doesn't care about keeping a log of it, so it doesn't matter. But I wish he would use a watch like this, because at least when he's running, he could see his heart rate and at least look at his heart rate over time and see if it's improving, getting worse, and help him measure his heart health. And that's something he doesn't do. So I think for all people, whether you're working out or not, that ability to measure your heart rate while you're doing anything, I think is super, super important and a worthwhile feature worth buying one of these. So, those are the main reasons that someone would get this. So is it worth it? I think for most people, just the ability to have the heart health aspect, I think it's worth it for that. But do I like getting notifications on my wrist? Sometimes it's annoying. And I think some people, there are going to be people who have a tendency to think it's really annoying and not liking that kind of attachment to them. So you have to think about that, whether you're really going to like it or not. And some of that stuff is kind of a gimmick. Like if you have your phone on you all the time, do you really need a watch too? No, you don't. But if you use it for those other reasons, like my reasons of being able to surf or swim and not have to have my phone, but still be able to get emergency calls. I have little kids, so if I'm not with all three of them and my wife's with some, I need to be able to take calls at all times to make sure there's not an emergency. So in that regard, it's very well worth it. And then The ability to track my heart rate at all times, I think, is important for all people. So those two reasons make it worthwhile for me. Otherwise, besides those two features, nothing is a necessity. I don't need it for any other reason. It's nice. It's a luxury to have it for the other things. But do you really need it? You have to ask yourself those questions. As far as like ease of use, like, is it easy to set up? Is it easy to use? If you already have an iPhone and you can, send email and install apps, the Apple Watch is not going to be any more difficult. You use an app on your phone to install apps, and it's very simple to use. Apple's made it very easy, very user-friendly. So I don't think you're going to have problems. Now, if you have an iPhone and you have problems using it, you can't really use it well, it's really difficult for you, I think you might have some issues with the watch as well, because it's the same kind of thing. So if you're very comfortable with your phone, I would have no problem giving this to my mom or dad, and they could very easily use the watch and figure out how to install it. It's very user friendly, so it will work for them. But I know some people who are not good with their phones that I work with who would have some problems with the watch, setting it up and using it. So that's something to definitely consider when you're looking at something like this. But I hope I've helped you, examine whether the watch is worth it for you. There are a lot more things that it does and a lot more features, and I don't want to go into all of them because you can very easily go to Apple's website and look them up. But what I really wanted to talk about is the fact whether it's a gimmick or not, and whether or not I think it's worth it, and what features really could make or break it being worth it for someone. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.